She is telling you that you need to be a jack of all trades. And I will say that she is 100% correct. Me growing up having a reality TV background and only being used to, back in the day, being used to be on camera, when I got wanting to learn how to do a podcast and becoming more of a journalist, I had to learn how to edit. And at the beginning, it's kind of stressful, but once you learn how to create your own content, it is so fulfilling to know that from start to finish, like Lindsay's talking about, you're able to create the graphics, upload something to YouTube, cut that highlight, do that interview, look good on camera, learn how to speak properly, maybe even write your own script. So those are some excellent tips for those of you guys that are listening that might want to get into broadcast journalism. Let's talk about the freaking awesome podcast. So recently, Lindsay just dropped a podcast called the Food of the Gods podcast. And I love her slogan that she put right under it on her Instagram. She will shout it out shortly. But it says, professional athletes eat and train to win. What does that look like? So, Lindsay, you kind of already talked about the concept, but can you talk about it again and discuss some of the interviews that you have encountered so far on that podcast?
So the idea, it's a podcast about how elite athletes eat and train to fuel the performance, how they work out, and what they put into their bodies to make sure that they are performing at their best year round, be it off season, in season, for whatever their training goals happen to be. And I am always fascinated by this, having been an athlete my whole life. I think that the way you go about your business with working out and eating is so individual to each person. And I love to hear what other people do. I think a lot of us look like, oh, I have to Google a diet and I need to follow the paleo diet to the letter if I'm going to have any success, or I need to follow whatever this other diet is to the letter to have success. But really, you need to kind of take in a lot of things and figure out what works for you. So I love talking to these people and just, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll try that. And kind of incorporating things even into my own regimens. We started the podcast with Michael Lorenzen, who is a pitcher and outfielder for the Cincinnati Reds. He's one of the few guys in the big leagues who's actually a pitcher and a position player. So his training is pretty interesting because a lot of pitchers don't lift a lot of weights. They don't train overhead because they're all about protecting their shoulders. But Michael definitely believes in training his whole body. He does a lot of Olympic lifts. He does a lot of pull-ups. You'll see him throwing med balls on the beach. He just does a lot of stuff that a lot of pitchers don't do, which I found super interesting. He's been tinkering with his diet. He's gluten-free, dairy-free, but mostly just eats a lot of whole food, but also tinkers with intermittent fasting. There's some days when he won't eat until like 4:00 in the afternoon at the ballpark. He'll do a long 16-hour fast even on game days. And so many people hear that and think it's crazy, but it really actually, if it works for your body, it's pretty good for you. So the Michael Lorenzen interview was really interesting. The second one was with Shari Hawkins, who's an Olympic heptathlete. She actually starts tomorrow competing in the heptathlon at the U.S. Olympic trials in Oregon. And she spoke a lot about growing up as a kid with certain ideas of what a female body is supposed to look like, and she's thinking, growing up, it's just supposed to look pretty. And then as she got older and became more and more of a successful athlete, she was realizing that her body wasn't just meant to look good. It was meant to do all these amazing things, and you have to feed it and treat it properly to allow it to do those things. So that was a really interesting interview. Bradley Bozeman is an offensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens. He's like 330 pounds. He obviously eats very differently than a 125-pound female heptathlete. But the thing that was so stunning about him, his pregame meal is 8 ounces of red meat, a bowl of pasta, a baked potato with cheese and sour cream, and a cream cheese bagel to wash it all down. And I'm like, oh my God, if I ate that much food before I tried to play, I would just be in a food coma on the couch for an entire week. But it works for Bradley Bozeman. So, that's what works for him. The one we have out now is with Arik Almirola, who is a NASCAR driver. And I actually found this one pretty fascinating because NASCAR is not a sport I've covered a lot. And he was talking about it being 130 degrees in the cockpit of that car. You're under so many G-forces holding the wheel. There's a lot of force on that wheel. So it's actually very there's like a lot of pressure. You're kind of in like an ISO hold up for 4 hours, but you can't drink or eat while you're doing it. So you have to come in with your nutrition into the race completely dialed, because you're in there for 4 hours sweating your patootie off. They often lose like 8 pounds in a race because they're sweating so much, and they can't eat or drink at all during the race. So they have to be so dialed in. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about that. And also their heart rates get up into what a lot of exercise people call like the no man's land of zone 3, the zone 3 heart rate zone, because you're not pushing all the way, but you're not taking it easy. And it's a hard zone to train in. So he talks about going out on his bike for, really long bike rides, because it's the only thing that really properly puts him into zone 3 to train for comparable conditions to what he'll be like in the race car. So it's been really interesting.
It definitely sounds really interesting. I want to actually check out this podcast. So I listen to a number of sports podcasts myself, and everybody's sports podcast is slightly different. Yours sounds like, yes, you are interviewing them, talking to them probably a little bit about their family life and their training and whatnot. But I love that you are focusing more so on their training and what they eat, because as you mentioned, a lot of people, especially if they're into their health and fitness, are kind of curious about, okay, maybe if I cut out dairy, maybe this will help me a little bit, or if I eat more red meat and incorporate more protein, or maybe if I try the keto diet, it might help me with anti-aging. So for those of you guys who are listening, please check out Lindsay's podcast. Lindsay, where can people find this podcast? And also please shout out the social media.
Sure. The website is messed up. It's just foodofthegodspodcast.com. And the Instagram is at Food of the Gods Pod. It's Food of the Gods Podcast on Facebook. You can basically get the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, pretty much everywhere.
Fantastic. And what can listeners look forward to this summer? Obviously, it sounds like you have 4 or 5 episodes out currently, and I'm sure you're actively interviewing and putting out content, I would assume monthly. So where can people, I know you just mentioned where people can listen, but what can they look forward to this summer?
So we're trying to cover like as many sports as possible. The one we have coming out next week is actually with a professional surfer, a woman named Brisa Hennessy, who is going to represent Costa Rica in the Olympics in Tokyo, because surfing is making its Olympic debut this summer at the Tokyo Games. Following Brisa, oh, wait a minute. No, you know what? Brisa's 2 weeks. Next week is Michael Delzato, the NHL defenseman, who is in ridiculously good shape. If you check out Michael Delzato's Instagram, you'll see he has like muscles on top of muscles. He's super lean. His podcast was really fun. And then Brisa. And then we actually have an interview with Jason Kalipa, who was in the CrossFit Games, I think for 8 years running, and he did win the CrossFit Games in 2008. I have been a CrossFit coach for many, many years. I started doing CrossFit in 2008, when the year that Jason Kalipa won. So I've been doing it for about 13 years. I always say since before it was cool. That interview was pretty fascinating to me, just because I've always been a Jason Kalipa fan, and because he just trains so much that it's just kind of cool to see how he eats, and also how his idea towards training that much has evolved as he's gotten older. So that was a really interesting one as well. That'll be 3 weeks from now.
Again, for those of you guys that are listening, please check out Lindsay Berra's podcast, Food of the Gods. You can find it on all forms of social media, it sounds like, and also anywhere where you can find the availability to listen to a podcast, whether it be on iTunes, Spotify, probably iHeartRadio. Please go check that out. And I know, Lindsay, you just spoke about being a CrossFit coach, which leads into my next question. How do you train to be an athlete? I also know you are a runner, hiker, golfer, and much more. So I would assume that having your grandfather be heavily involved in baseball, and you being such a fantastic athlete yourself, that probably lately sparked your interest in wanting to start this podcast. So how do you train as an athlete, and what the heck do you enjoy eating that's healthy in your life?
So I have always been an exercise-aholic. It actually, Grandpa obviously was an athlete, but a lot of that actually came from my mother growing up, she was a cyclist. She was a runner. She was a racquetball player. I always kind of kid her. She was riding her bike like literally 60 miles at a shot while she was pregnant with me. And I was born very early at 31 weeks. And I'm like, Mom, maybe if you hadn't been riding your bike 60 miles a day, I would have stayed in there a little longer. My mom was definitely an exercise-aholic, and I definitely got a lot of that from her as well. After I graduated from college, I was into triathlons for a number of years. I was running 10 milers and half marathons. The Olympic distance triathlon was my thing. That's a, what is it? A 1.5 mile swim, like a 25-ish mile bike, and a 10K run, 6.2 miles at the end. I did a bunch of those. And then I had a massive hip surgery in 2007, which was the result of playing hockey with boys for so many years. I had 2 labrum tears, a bone spur on my femur, a psoas impingement, all kinds of stuff. So I stopped running as much, started biking a little bit more, and also started doing CrossFit right after my hip surgery because I wanted all the muscles around my messed up hip to be super strong. And I really fell in love with CrossFit, not for a lot of the same reasons that a lot of people fall in love with it. People love competing against other people in CrossFit. I never really cared what the person next to me was doing. I liked to compete against myself and, you know, be better than I was the week before. I loved learning new skills. I remember back in the day, like when I could do like 2 pull-ups in a row, and now I can do like 25 pull-ups in a row. And it's always just cool, even as I get older, to maintain those skills and be able to do those things. So nowadays I am like, I've also had 7 concussions, which is not a good thing. So I had to also stop riding my road bike a lot because they told me I can't hit my head anymore. So I mostly ride the Peloton inside now from a biking perspective. I have a little mini CrossFit gym in my garage. So I kind of alternate CrossFit workouts with Peloton rides. I do a lot of yoga. My boyfriend and I hike a ton. I've hiked all over the world, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, did, you know, long 2-week stints in the Dolomites, in the Alps, in the Andes in Peru. I really do love to hike. I learned to play golf a couple years ago, very poorly. I'm not good at it, but I do enjoy it. I just basically like to be outside. So my boyfriend and I do a lot of the hiking and golf just to be outdoors. As far as eating, I can't eat gluten. So I'm gluten-free out of necessity. I don't drink, so I save a lot of calories and alcohol that I put towards chocolate because chocolate is a food group for me. I know, I love it. I really
like
do.
chocolate ice cream or like the candy
No,
or
like
all of it?
chocolate. Like I love dark chocolate, and I swear to God, I eat a piece of dark chocolate every day after breakfast. I call it my breakfast dessert. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't have a piece of chocolate. And you know what? Like I don't care. It's fine. It makes me happy. I don't care about the extra calories. So I definitely work out a lot, but I do really like to eat. I'm a total foodie. I love to cook. So I kind of view my workouts as making room for the food I'm going to put in later.
I loved learning that you eat very healthy. You are gluten-free, which a lot of people are. They can't eat anything gluten-related. And I think that's pretty cool that you actually stay away from alcohol. For those of you guys that aren't familiar with alcohol, I actually have to stay away from it a good amount too because I have really bad allergies. And if you drink too much alcohol, it can actually create inflammation in your body. So if you're active like Lindsay is, staying away from alcohol is very important. Please stay with us. You guys just listened to Lindsay Berra talk all about her early years growing up in Jersey with her family, with her mom and dad, with her grandfather, also everything in between, sports related, playing collegiate, softball, also playing men's league freaking hockey at wee hours in the morning before going to school. We are hearing her talk all about food in her podcast, Food of the Gods podcast. She is actually a host and just started releasing episodes, I believe, this past month, the month of June. So we are going to switch on over to the Berra family legacy. This is part 2. So Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra. He was actually born in 1925, and he is a legend in the baseball world. I'm just going to ramble off some facts for you guys, for those of you guys that will be listening to this podcast. He played the position of catcher, which is why I was picking Lindsay's brain earlier, if she ever played that position herself. He also later became a coach and a manager. He played freaking 19 seasons, like holy crap, 19 seasons in the MLB. Most of them with the infamous New York Yankees. We all know that the Yankees are literally a dynasty. He won freaking 10 World Series. Like, that is almost unheard of. 10 World Series, an 18-time All-Star, and widely regarded as one of the greatest catchers in baseball history. Hold on, guys. I have some more facts for you.
You need another page.
I need another page. I'm like, hold on a minute. Let me flip it over. I'm like, he is only one of 6 players to win the American League MVP award 3 times. So not one, but 3 times. And he was elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame back in 1972. So Lindsay, let's talk all about your grandfather. his lasting legacy on the baseball world. And before we even talk about that, how the heck did he himself get into the sport of baseball?
So he grew up on the Hill in St. Louis, Missouri. The Hill was the Italian section. His parents were Italian immigrants. All three of his older brothers were born in Italy. He was the first sibling born here, and then his younger sister behind him. And the kids on the Hill, it sort of sounds the way I grew up. We had TV, but I wasn't allowed to be inside and watching it. Grandpa didn't have TV. There was no video games. So they were just outside playing sports all day. They played sandlot baseball. He played basketball. He played football. He played street hockey. They used to duct tape newspapers to their shins because they couldn't afford shin guards. They played this crazy game where you hit a bottle cap with a broomstick. And I would say, and Grandpa was known as a quote unquote bad ball hitter, but I'm pretty sure that he developed a lot of that hand-eye coordination, hitting a bottle cap with a broomstick. Try that. It is very hard. Hank Aaron did it too, and we see where that got him with all those home runs. So anybody wants to learn how to hit a baseball, try that. It's very difficult. He actually he would tell you that his three older brothers were better baseball players than he was, but the family was very poor and the older brothers had to work to help support the family. But by the time it got down to my grandpa Yogi, his older brothers convinced my great-grandfather Pietro to let Grandpa Yogi have a chance to play baseball. So one of them would have a chance to make it as a baseball player. At that point, my grandfather was a right-handed hitter and through right-handed. My Uncle Tony had the presence of mind to take my grandfather from being a right-handed hitter and switch him around to being a lefty because he thought he would have a better chance of making the big leagues as a left-handed hitter. And we all know how that turned out because Yogi Berra is not Yogi Berra if he's right-handed. So that happened when he was about 10 years old. And he played American Legion ball. This is actually sort of a crazy story. He and his neighbor across the street, who was a guy named Joe Garagiola. Joe is in the Baseball Hall of Fame as a broadcaster. He played for and won a World Series with the St. Louis Cardinals. In the early 1940s, Grandpa and Joe Garagiola went to an open tryout for the St. Louis Cardinals together. At that time, Branch Rickey, who would later become the general manager of the Dodgers and become famous for signing Jackie Robinson to break the color barrier in baseball. At that time, Branch Rickey was the general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals. Branch Rickey offered Joe Garagiola $500 to sign with the Cardinals. He only offered my grandfather $250, and Grandpa thought that he and Joe were worth the same amount. So he told Branch Rickey no. Branch Rickey had a plan. He did this on purpose. He knew he was leaving the Cardinals and going to the Dodgers, and he wanted to save Grandpa Yogi for the Dodgers. However, in the interim of Branch Rickey moving from the Cardinals to the Dodgers, George Weiss from the Yankees swoops in and signs my grandfather, and the rest is history, because if Grandpa Yogi had been a Dodger, things would have been very different as well.
Oh my gosh, I actually love learning all that history because I feel like people grow up reading about the greats like your grandfather, like Joe DiMaggio, like Mickey Mantle, and it's like we don't hear these insider stories. So I'm so happy that you were on here being able to tell those insider stories. First of all, I think it's wild that did you correct me if I'm wrong, did you say $250 or $500 and now people are getting paid millions of dollars?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
that is so wild to me.
So Joe was offered $500 was like a standard signing bonus back then, and it was a lot of money in the early 40s, right? But if you think about it, so my grandfather's best year in Major League Baseball, the year he made the most money, he made $60,000, which is the equivalent. We just did this math at the museum recently of about $550,000 today. The league minimum in Major League Baseball is $750,000. So my grandfather, in his best year in baseball, with 10 World Series and 3 MVP awards and 18 All-Star appearances, doesn't even make the league minimum today. So it's people talk about what he would have to be paid today with that much winning and the stats. And they're like, he would basically be unpayable, but he didn't play in an era where that was a thing. So he played in an era where baseball players had to have second jobs in the off season to be able to put their children through college. So my grandfather worked in a hardware store in the off season. He sold Christmas trees. He sold suits at a menswear shop in Newark, New Jersey. And then finally, he and Phil Rizzuto, who was the shortstop for the Yankees, they got sick of working odd jobs, and they actually opened a bowling alley out here in New Jersey about, I don't know, it's probably about 25 minutes from Yankee Stadium. and they had a bowling alley for years, and that was their off-season business, but they needed to have extra jobs to be able to support their families.
Wow, honestly, and this is going to sound weird, but I think that is one of the most interesting facts I have learned about your grandfather, and all of the facts that I've ever heard about him is him having to work multiple jobs while playing so well in the MLB back in the day. I think that's super freaking cool and really interesting. So I'm definitely going to be using that clip as like a highlight clip, having you talk about that, because I think that's like mind blowing. I'm like speechless at this point.
Most athletes in the 50s and the 60s had to have other business interests to be able to work, because they just didn't make, even in the, if you compare the money to, back then type money, they had a well-paying job, but they weren't like crazy rich the way athletes are today.
So freaking interesting. I literally love that fact. Thank you so much for sharing that with the Boss Babes fanatics. And I want to jump into talking about the Yogi Berra Museum shortly. But before we get into that, your grandfather is widely known for what people call, quote unquote, yogi-isms. So are there any yogi-isms that stick out in your mind? What are some of your favorites? And I know people still use some of them to this day.
So the most famous ones are, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. It ain't over till it's over is probably the most famous. My favorites are more the existential ones. If the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. Future ain't what it used to be. What I like to point out about the yogiisms is that on the surface, a lot of them seem to be a little silly, but if you're able to open your mind, they really do make a lot of sense. And there is some very sage wisdom in there. My grandfather had a very unique way of looking at the world, and he was just very able to cut through all the BS and all the noise and call it like he saw it. So, like, for example, nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded, right? If you knew the restaurant was going to be totally jam-packed and you were hungry, would you go there and wait online for an hour to eat? No, you'd go somewhere else where you knew you could get a cheeseburger, right? The future ain't what it used to be. As we see, things evolve every day, and it's not what we thought it would be. So many of them are so, like, prescient, and they really just make a lot of sense when you think about them. And I know growing up that if I went to ask my grandfather for advice, he would point out something that was so obvious that you actually couldn't see it yourself. You needed him to point it out for you. So he was great for that.
Super fantastic. I'm happy that I asked that question about the yogi-isms, and I want to talk about the fact that you are actually a board member at the Yogi Berra Family Museum. I've never been there before. I would love to go there. Is it located in New Jersey?
Yeah, so the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center is on the campus of Montclair State University in Little Falls, New Jersey. It's literally 12 miles west of the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. You can be here from Manhattan in less than 20 minutes. There's actually a train that comes from Penn Station right out to the university, so it's super accessible from New York City. The museum opened in 1999. And it is a museum. It does have a lot of cool stuff in it, like Grandpa's MVP plaques. We have all 27 New York Yankees World Series rings. So there's a lot of memorabilia in the place, but we take the learning center part of it very seriously. My grandfather was forced to quit school in the 8th grade to go to work to help his immigrant family. And he was always very conscious of the fact that he didn't get the opportunity to finish his education. The moment he had enough money to be able to do so, he established a scholarship fund at Columbia University, which still exists today, to give kids the opportunity to get the education that he wasn't able to get. And when he opened the museum, this was a very important component, right? So the learning center part of the museum, we teach Grandpa's values of excellence and humility and treating people with respect to generations, the next generation of kids. During COVID, it was actually a great opportunity for us, as terrible as COVID was for a lot of people. It forced us to bring our education programs into the virtual space. So instead of having to have kids come into the museum, we were able to do them virtually, and we were able to get so many more kids to participate in them than we would have been able to if they had to come to the museum to do them. We had kids from St. Louis, from Pittsburgh, from Houston, from Atlanta doing our virtual education programs. We teach a character education program. We teach a STEM program based on the science and math of baseball. We teach a civil rights and diversity program. We have a Negro Leagues exhibit that basically teaches kids the history of racism in sports and therefore the history of racism in society that has been so relevant over the last few years. And we also do a spoken word program based on Grandpa's Yogiisms where the kids write their own poetry. So it's super cool, and it's a really cool way to keep Grandpa's legacy alive and introduce him to a generation of kids that never got the chance to see him play.
And I know that you just mentioned during COVID, you guys are doing a lot of virtual stuff, which is absolutely incredible to keep people engaged and learning, especially during a time where people needed it most. Is the museum currently open now? And the reason why I ask is for those people that might be listening sometime this summer or fall, can people go to the museum if they want to plan like a vacation to go there?
They absolutely can. The museum is open all normal hours now. We're open Wednesday through Sunday from noon to 5. The website is yogiberramuseum.org. What's also super fun about the museum, it is adjacent to the Montclair State University baseball field, which is also home to the New Jersey Jackals, which is a Can-Am League minor league baseball team. So you can kind of link up your visit to the museum with a minor league baseball game. On the days that the Jackals play night games, we do stay open until 7 until the game starts. So you can come to the museum and then go check out a baseball game at the stadium and make it like a nice long baseball day that's really worth, it's a little bit more bang for your buck if you're going to travel to come to the museum. It's really cool.
That's excellent. So for those of you guys that are listening, you heard Lindsay say it right out of her mouth that the museum is open. Go plan a trip, whether you are local or not local. And Cooperstown probably isn't that far away either. So if you want to go check out the Baseball Hall of Fame, you could probably bang that out and like do a whole weekend of all fun baseball stuff. You guys are now listening to Lindsay Berra. She's actually the Food of the Gods podcast host. She is a well-known woman in sports. I'm so thrilled to have her on here today. Thank you, BosBabes fanatics, so much for listening to this episode. You guys are learning so much about the Berra legacy, the family, and everything in between. I want to hop right into the fact that literally this week, I think yesterday, and Lindsay can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it happened yesterday, the Forever stamp was just released honoring the legacy of her grandfather. And on it, you guys need to go Google it. It is so pretty. I'm actually going to share it out on my personal Instagram today. So the photo is of Yogi smiling. He has his Yankees hat on. He's in his catcher's gear. And up top, it says Baseball All-Star up top. So, Lindsay, what was that whole experience like seeing that Forever stamp be released yesterday? And I think you guys honored it at the museum, correct?
Yeah. So yesterday was such a cool day for the museum and for my family. This was the first, they call it first day cover ceremony. Stamp collectors who might be listening, they know about this. I had to learn all about it. I had no idea. They issue like a special envelope and you put the stamp on it and they put a stamp on it that cancels the stamp. And if you've gotten this piece of memorabilia on the first day of issue, like 20 years from now, it'll be worth a lot of money. So stamp collectors come from all over to get these things. This was the first day cover ceremony that the post office has been able to do in person since COVID. And we were so excited that it was Grandpa's stamp and that we were able to do it at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center. This process started evidently, unbeknownst to us, it started about 5 years ago. The post office started considering the idea of putting my grandfather on a stamp in 2016. You do have to be dead to be on a postage stamp. So after he passed away, someone within the post office had nominated him, but it is a very long process of approvals. There's a special board to decide who gets to be on a stamp. And finally, last year, right at the beginning of COVID, they approached my family to say that they would like to put Grandpa on a stamp and would that be all right? And my dad, who has been a really dorky stamp collector my entire life, he was beside himself, thrilled that the post office would consider this. So he said, of course. You mentioned the artwork. I am absolutely in love with this thing. Just thinking about it makes me smile. It's such a great image of my grandfather, but it didn't start that way. The first few drafts, it was a picture of him batting or catching, and it was kind of far away. You couldn't see his face. But there were apparently a lot of really big Yankee fans within the post office who said, no, we can't use that artwork for Yogi. He was so much more than just a baseball player. We have to do something that shows his personality. So we ended up with this beautiful digital artwork of my grandfather smiling. Like you said, the Yankee cap is there. You see the chest protector, so you know he's a catcher. But even people who don't know who he is will get this thing in the mail and see that big smile and be like, hey, who's this happy fellow bringing a little joy to my mailbox? And maybe they see that slogan, Yogi Berra forever, and Google him and learn a little bit more about him. And I don't know that there's a better way that we could have come up with to keep Grandpa's legacy alive than sending his picture all over the country with the tagline Yogi Berra forever on it. So it is literally just amazing. And we're all just, I mean, so I've had permagrin all week.
Is there any other ways in the future that you guys plan on honoring your grandfather's legacy? Obviously, you have the museum, there's the stamp, there's all kinds of great stuff going on. But do you have anything else in the future planned?
Really, just we had to kind of suspend all big events, obviously, because of COVID, like everyone else had to. We have a golf outing every year. That is normally in the spring, but will be in October this year. And we do have a gala every year in April that takes place at the Plaza Hotel in New York. But the best way to kind of find out what's going on with the museum is to either follow the museum on Twitter at Yogi Berra Museum, or you can follow me on Twitter. And I always tweet all the events that are happening. You can follow the Yankees because they do a lot of stuff with my grandfather as well. That's really the best way to keep in touch and learn what's happening.
So people can get to know your personality a little bit better. How do you plan on spending your summer? Obviously, you're going to be probably actively involved with the museum and whatnot, but do you like to go to the beach? What types of vacations are you going to be taking, if any? And charity work. A big part of the BosBabes Lifestyle Sports podcast is how do people give back? You already mentioned that you do a lot of learning classes for children and whatnot. So let's first hit upon how are you going to enjoy your summer and what types of charity work are the Berra family currently involved in?
So this summer, my mother and my brother both live on the Jersey Shore. So I'm lucky that anytime I need a beach day, I just can go down and, visit one of my family members and hang out on the beach for a day. So that's great. My boyfriend and I do go on a lot of like overnight hiking trips up to the Catskills. We do have a bigger trip planned. We're going to Maine at the end of July, and we are hiking Mount Katahdin, which is the highest peak in Maine, but it is also the terminus of the Appalachian Trail, and I've wanted to do that for a very long time. So we're going to go up and hike Mount Katahdin and then go spend a couple of days also hiking in Acadia National Park. So that's what we have planned for the summer. I do also hope to get out to California. My best friend, Alyssa Ronick, who I worked with at ESPN Magazine for a very long time, just bought a lodge with her husband and several friends in Big Bear Lake called The Outpost. You should totally check that out on Instagram. It's adorable, and I need to get out there and spend a couple nights in one of her cabins and do some hiking in the San Bernardino wild forest. So I plan on doing that probably closer to the fall when it's a little bit cooler. That's it, really. And that and playing a lot of bad golf.
Sounds like an excellent summer that you have planned. I love that you are very active and love to get out and do a bunch of traveling. Like you said, you did a lot of traveling as well with the sports world and charity work. How do you guys give back to the local community?
So we really do a ton of events at my grandfather's museum. Most of them are education focused with getting underserved school districts into the museum. I mentioned that with COVID, we were able to see so many more kids. There are some poor school or really underfunded school districts here in New Jersey, Paterson, Newark, that could never afford busing to get the kids to the museum. But with COVID, we were able to get some grants and allow all of the 5th and 6th graders from Newark school system to come to the museum for free, which was amazing. So we have those education programs going. We also do a lot with veterans at the museum. My grandfather enlisted in the Navy during World War II before he even had the chance to be drafted, because he was very proud of being an American and felt that it was his duty to serve his adopted country. So he ended up in a rocket boat off the coast of Omaha Beach during the D-Day invasion as a machine gunner's assistant, providing cover for our troops going ashore. He was very proud of his military service. And we do a lot for veterans at the museum. We host a veteran services fair every year where they can come and learn about all of the programs that are available to them that they don't necessarily know exist, like health insurance and investment plans. And, you know, we basically host this whole fair at the museum where they can come in and talk to even get like better auto insurance rates, all these things that are veterans. We give annual awards to local high school athletes every year who not only are good on the field, but are, demonstrate grandpa's qualities of leadership and respect, and also giving back to their community. So we host a lot of high school kids as well. Really, all of the charity work that I'm doing right now is through my grandfather's museum and the local outreach that we do there.
For those of you guys that might be local, please, again, feel free to go check out the Yogi Berra Museum. It sounds like it's very local. If you're on the East Coast, you can just hop on a train, drive there, get on a plane. It sounds like it's very close to New York. So like Lindsay mentioned, you can make it your point to go to a freaking Yankees game if you want. Hit up the museum. And also you got Cooperstown right there, which probably isn't that far of a drive. So you could do a full weekend. And that is amazing that you do so much charity work. We are going to wrap up the show. I want to thank you so much, Lindsay, for coming on. Please, once again, shout out your social media because I'm sure people want to actively follow you, and mention one last time where people can listen to the Food of the Gods podcast.
So my social media is at Lindsay Berra on all platforms: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I think that's it, and that's plenty. And then Food of the Gods podcast you can find basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can check out foodofthegodspodcast.com for more information on the podcast itself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I look forward to having you back on here again at some point, because for those of you guys that are listening, the BosBabes fanatics love keeping in touch with our special guests. So it's not like a one and done. So you have another cool event coming up, or something amazing happens with your grandfather's legacy, or you get like an amazing job that you want to talk about. I would love to have you back on the podcast and chat everything that you were up to. I love keeping people updated on this Lifestyle Sports podcast. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on for the first time, but I look forward to seeing you on here in the near future.
Thank you so much, Britt, for having me. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you letting me share all my stuff with all of your listeners so they can hopefully come and check it all out.